This is Tom Pacheco calling from the land of the North Star to the land of the Southern Cross, and you are listening to Retrospectives with John Broughton on KC Radio 97.7 FM.
If you're drowning in the darkness, fading lost and floating helpless.
Well, hopefully we'll have a great conversation today. If you're all comfortable and set to go, I'll try not to test your memory too much.
Well, you can ask anything you want. You know, at my age, I'm not afraid to hide everything or anything because I have no idea how long I'm going to be alive, and it's I'm too old to bullshit. You know. Yeah.
Well, let's start talking about your dad. He was a jazz musician, obviously a great influence on you developing an interest in music. Do you think we'd be here today talking about your career in music if it had not been for his influence?
Pardon?
Your dad was a jazz musician. Obviously,
yes.
a great influence on you developing an interest in music. Do you think you would have gone into music had it not been for him?
You know, I probably would have, but it would have been, you know, probably a little harder. But I was raised on a farm in Massachusetts, and it was a jazz band, you know, in the Django Reinhardt style. He was a friend of Django Reinhardt, and when Django Reinhardt came to America in the early 50s to tour with Duke Ellington, you know, Django spent a couple of nights at our house. I was only a little child, not a kid, but yeah, there was always music, and on the farm I was born on, we had a barn, and all of his jam sessions were there, and rehearsals, and we had jazz players from Harlem and St. Louis and Kansas City and Boston, you know, would come, and, you know, of gypsies, and it was a wild way to grow up. In fact, my very first memory is, I was probably about 4 or 3.5 or something like that, and I was walking down the stairs from the upstairs, and it was morning, and he had a Gibson Sunburst guitar on a chair, and the sun was shining through the window and shining on the Gibson Sunburst guitar, and it looked so beautiful. I knew that someday I would play guitar. Years later, I was probably 9, and I was in school, and the music teacher in the school that ran the school band called me into his office, and he was holding a trumpet, and he said, "This is the instrument that you're going to play." And I was, you know, I guess kind of a wise ass at that age. I said, "No, I'm not going to play the trumpet. I'm going to play the guitar like my father." So that ended any, you know, trumpet lessons and everything like that. And I didn't start playing guitar until I was 10, and I've been playing it ever since.
I think you were about 19 when your first record came out. Is that right?
Yeah. It was from a very small label in New England. You know, a very limited edition. I think there were only, oh my God, like 400 copies printed. And I actually had written. I started writing songs at 15, and I had enough songs that by the time I was, I think, 17, I made that album, and it came out when I was 19. I was still living in Massachusetts, but at the age of 19, I left the farm in Massachusetts and moved to Greenwich Village, New York, where I stayed for about 12 or 13 years. It was the summer of 1966. In fact, I have a new song about that. It's called Greenwich Village, Summer 1966. And I was a kid. I was a kid right from the farm in New York City. It was the first time that I'd been there, and it was an amazing time. I went with a folk country rock band, before the term country rock was ever used. And I played in that band about a year, but it was great in Greenwich Village at that time because Jimi Hendrix was playing at the Cafe Wah under the name Jimmy James and the Blue Flame. Arnold Guthrie was at the Gaslight Cafe, still writing Alice's Restaurant. It's a long song. It takes a whole side of an album, and it was like going to school because you go to all the clubs down there, the Bitter End and Gordy's Folk City, and so many clubs, and it was like going to school because I would go to sometimes 7 or 8 clubs a night, because back then, if you were a musician, you could get in free. So I got to see, it's like in '67 and '68, when Joni Mitchell first played there, and I remember seeing Christopherson at the Gaslight playing. Me and Bobby McGee, he had just written that, and it was like, it was just great, to see all these people. The Buffalo Springfield came from California and played there, and Johnny Cash would show up once in a while, but it was filled with musicians, John Sebastian, all kinds of people, and I took huge advantage of that by just, slipping into the clubs and watching everybody.
Yeah, a couple of your early bands, there was the Ragamuffins and Euphoria. Tell us about those bands, and were they very similar in sound?
No, the Ragamuffins were like a folk country rock band, and Euphoria, to tell the truth, I was washing dishes in the Cafe Wah, and my girlfriend Sharon that I sang with in the Ragamuffins, heard Roger and Wendy Beckett, and I said, if we got together to make an album, a pop kind of an album, it was like a Spanky and Our Gang, Mamas and Papas type group. It might get me out of this dishwashing job, which was like 7 nights a week and about 10 hours a day. And sure enough, we rehearsed in an old hotel on the Broadway Central Hotel, a really cheap bums hotel. But we got signed by Jerry Ross, who produced Spanky and Our Gang, and Keith, you know that song 98.6, and
Oh yes, yeah.
and Bobby Head, Funny, and yeah. So you know that was the last real straight job that I had, and ever since then I've supported myself, you know, as a songwriter, singer, and you know I've probably made about 27 albums now of one kind or another, you know.
Mm. After those two bands, the Ragamuffins and Euphoria, do you think you're more ready to take on a solo career than you would have been back at the age of 19?
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't a very good songwriter at that age, you know. I mean, you know, people like, James Taylor was in the Village at the time, and absolutely fantastic, you know, and we moved. The Ragamuffins moved from the Cafe Bar to the Night Owl Cafe in October of 1966, and that club had 3 bands a night, 6 nights a week, and we played 3 sets a night. All 3 bands from about 7 o'clock in the evening till 4 o'clock in the morning, and of course when you played there, it was like a residency, so you'd stay there for months, and the other two bands that we played with was the Flying Machine, where James Taylor was the songwriter, and Danny Cooch, you know, was the guitarist, and the third band was a group called the Lost City Dreamers, which later recorded under the name of Circus Maximus, and the songwriter in that band was Jerry Jeff Walker.
Oh.
It was a rock band, you know, because Jerry Jeff is not from Texas. I think Jerry was born in upstate New York somewhere, and so you know, to hear songs all the time. You know, the funny thing was Jerry Jeff Walker's band, you know, which was a rock and roll band, but Jerry had written Mr. Bojangles, but the band turned it down. You know, his band, and you know, and later went on to become a classic song, but that band actually turned down that song, you know, that Jerry Jeff had written, and of course after the bands all broke up, James went to England and signed with Apple Records, and Danny Cooch, or Danny Korchmar, his real name, went to California and worked with people like Carole King, and Jerry Jeff went to Texas, and this would have been around 1967.
Mm.
And then Sharon and I, you know, that sang together in the Ragamuffins and in Euphoria, was signed by Clive Davis at Columbia Records, and we made an album called Pacheco and Alexander in the fall of 1970, and I remember there was a funny story. We were, you know, singing all over the village, just the two of us, me with my acoustic guitar and early songs, and an A&R man from Columbia Records came to the show and said, you know what, I would like you to do a demo recording so I could play it for Clive Davis, and I was so tired of doing demos that, you know, were always tossed inside a waste paper basket as soon as we left an office in New York City. And I said, well, if Clive, you know, wants to hear us, he'll have to hear us live in his office. Never thinking that would ever happen. And about 2 days later, I get a phone call from the guy in the A&R department and said, can you be in Clive's office at Black Rock, Columbia Records, at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon? And so Sharon and I had almost no money at the time. We were watching our dollars very carefully, and we rode the subway to Black Rock and sang for Clive and the head of his publishing company there, whose name was Neil Anderson. And we walked out with the Columbia Records deal, you know, and we were so happy that we said, hell, you know, let's spend the money on a taxi to go back to the hotel we were living in. And that album was produced by John Hall of later on Orleans fame, and Janis Joplin had just died that October, and her backup band, the Fulton Boogie Band, were living in Woodstock, which I hadn't seen yet, but they ended up backing this up on that album, which is called Pacheco and Alexander.
You've certainly moved around a lot over the years. You've been at various times based in Woodstock, Austin, Texas, Nashville, and a period of time in Ireland. Have each one of these places, has each one of these places had a distinct influence on the music that you've made at the time?
Well, I will always say Greenwich Village in those years, and Austin, Texas, you know, and Ireland after that. I lived 10 years in Ireland. I was based there, but I was playing in Ireland, but in England and Scotland, and, you know, all over Europe, in Germany, Amsterdam, Scandinavia, Italy, you know, all those countries, and after 10 really nice years, I'll always have a warm memory of Ireland. I have so many friends there, but we moved back to the States, and Annie and I, my wife, weren't sure, you know, where we were going to land. You know, say, should we go to California, or Texas, or but you know, we chose Woodstock because it was close, you know, about 240 miles from my mother and father, you know, who were very, very, you know, getting very, very old, and I wanted to spend the last years close to them. My mother died on October 1st, 2001, and my father died on January 6th, 2005. But I still go over to Europe and play in England, Scotland, Sweden, Norway, and, you know, Italy. Yeah, but every place that I've been, you know, I have tried to pick up something. I love to listen to other musicians and see what they're doing. You know, the older people and the younger people. I'm always fascinated by what's going on. I've never been a person that only lives in the 60s and 70s. I'm completely fascinated by, younger people. Like I'm doing a show on February 25th at the Old Gaslight Cafe in Greenwich Village, a legendary spot. Have you ever heard of it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it had been closed for years, and it just reopened. And they contacted me a couple of weeks ago and said, "Would you play there?" I said, "I would love to," because it's only 100 miles from Woodstock to the center of New York City, and I was happy to hear that the act opening up for me is a young artist, a singer-songwriter named Alana Amram, David Amram's daughter. So it's going to be like, a songwriter in the youth of her life, and a songwriter like me toward the end of his life, and it'll be nice. I'm really looking forward to it,
It's the ultimate compliment for a songwriter to have their songs covered by others, and this has happened to you numerous times. Any personal favourites, covers of your songs done by others?
Well, I've had a lot of European covers, loads and loads, and some in the States. Rick Danko recorded a couple of my songs, and the band on the very last album, Jubilation, recorded 2 songs. I think that album probably came out in 1999. And then Rick Danko died, as you probably know.
Yep.
And the Jefferson Starship recorded my song "All Fly Away, Dragon Fly Away." It became the title song of their album in 1974. And but my favorite, of all the people that have recorded my songs, the one that I like the most was a song that I wrote with a Native American songwriter called The Indian Prayer, and Richie Havens recorded that. And I've always loved Richie Havens, always. And he's a close friend of mine. His health is very bad now, I'm sorry to say, but he recorded the Indian Prayer way back, probably in '74 or something like that. But there are always songs getting recorded now by older bands and young bands too.
I've read articles where it's been quoted that you've been known to write up to 40 to 50 songs per year, which is quite prolific. When working in such quantities, how do you go through the process of cutting down the number of songs to select for a CD?
That's the hardest thing in the world, honestly. I've written close to 3,000 songs now. I started writing at the age of 15 and never stopped, and I just turned 65, so it's my 50th year of songwriting.
Wow.
and I just love songwriting, but I also love listening to all kinds of artists, famous, unfamous, bad artists. Sometimes are not very good, but and some great ones, and there's it's important, for because there are a lot of artists my age were sort of stuck in the 60s and 70s, but I've never been that way. I've always been fascinated by, what's happening and what are people doing now, and I pay attention to it, and I get their CDs, and like artists like young artists like Amy Speace or Diana Jones, and there's one that is not so young. She's probably about 49 or 50, who's played Australia, who's a very close friend of mine named Mary Gaucher.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, she's a very close friend of mine. She lives in Nashville now, but yeah, in fact, we did a show together, I think about, I don't know, about 8 or 9 months ago, a concert about 100 miles from here, and it was a really good concert. And yeah, we always joke, and she tells me road stories, and I tell her road stories, and yeah, she's great. She's just a wonderful songwriter.
So has the procedure of songwriting changed much for you over that 50 years? Do you go about it any differently now than back in the early days?
No, it's strange. Well, every songwriter has their own way of writing. Everybody writes differently. And for me, it's always like, I'd say 95% of the time, I think of a subject or a story, whether it's personal or outside of my life, somebody else's life, or there's songs all over the place, and it's a subject, but and I sort of think about it, and I write a melody that will complement the subject of the song, because it's very important to have the words and music match. And so I'll just sort of, think about, I want to write about 2 bank robbers or something like that. And then I'll write a melody, and then I'll put all the words on top of that.
You mentioned Rick Danko earlier, and I believe he was a great friend of yours, and I believe he was also influential in getting you up in front of American audiences again.
That's absolutely true, because when I left America, in this business, you have some good years, and then you've got some really crappy years, really, really bad years, and so I had left Nashville to move to Ireland. I first lived in a little tiny village called Oldcastle in County Meath, and started to hang out with a lot of traditional Irish players, and then I moved to Dublin. I guess 6 months after I arrived, and yeah, it was, and what was the original question?
How he was, Rick was influential in getting you back in front of American.
Okay,
yeah.
right, and I hadn't made an album since the RCA albums that came out in 1976, and so it had been 13 years since I'd made an album. I was in Ireland at the time, but I had been writing constantly. It had this huge catalog, and I was, I spent a lot of the time in Texas and Nashville, and on the road and all over America, in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, and all those places, and I started to record it in Ireland, and I started to have a lot of luck, and in Scandinavia too, in Norway and Sweden, and started having hit albums, and a lot of Europeans recording my songs, and of all ages, and I had been so burned out about America that I said, well, I'll come back to America, and I'll get a little place in Woodstock, and I'll just live here, and I'll just, like 5 times a year I'll fly over to Europe and do a 4-week tour or something, and I got Rick in town because the band backed me up on an album I did in 1997, I think, called Woodstock Winter. My wife Annie and I flew from Dublin to Kennedy Airport, and the band picked us up in a car, and I recorded that album at Levon Helm's house, and Levon played drums, and Garth was there, and Rick, and I got to know them all well, and when I moved back here, I told Rick, Rick, I'm not going to do any American gigs. I'm just going to, I'm going to work around my house, fix my roof, do all that, but I'm not going to, I don't want to play America. And he said, Tom, it's your, he said, my audience is your audience. You have to play America. And so I started to open up his shows about 1998, and I would do about 45 minutes. He'd probably do about an hour, and then we would close out the show with both of us singing one of my songs, a song called Hills of Woodstock. Have you ever heard that one?
Yes.
Yeah, and so, we had, so much fun. One day he came to my house in a bus that somebody gave to him, a road bus, and we started to, go from, all over the place doing gigs, and Rick was always at my house at night. You probably know that I wrote that song, I'll Leave a Light On for You, about Rick.
Yeah, beautiful song.
And every night, because I'm a nocturnal person, I always have been. I write my songs at night. It's quiet, and it's just me and my dog, in the back room, and my wife is sleeping, and I live in a little ranch house, and my wife's bedroom is on one side of the ranch house, and the songwriting room is on the exact opposite. So, I don't wake her up, and Rick would come around, and because he was a nocturnal person, and he'd bang on the window, and he'd come in, and we would, he'd tell me all kinds of wild stories about the band, which, stories that absolutely nobody knows that I can't talk about until everybody in the band is dead, because it's the wildest stuff that absolutely nobody knows. I mean, it's, some of it horrifying, some of it, it's just, but, and we pick up guitars, and we'd sing, and we talk. We have a, as I mentioned, I think in the liner notes of that album, we have coffee, and I always had a bottle of Irish whiskey, and we'd actually kind of waste the whiskey a little bit by putting it in the coffee, and we, it was great, and on December 10th, 1999, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but it certainly is, Rick died, and in fact, the last time he was in a recording studio, which was 3 weeks before he died, because he had to go off and do some shows in Detroit, I think. His last recordings are 2 songs on an album that I did with Steinar Albertson called nobodies, and he wasn't finished, because he was going to do a couple of more harmonies on it, but he came back from the tour and died 2 days later of a heart attack. And it was a heart attack. Everybody thought it was drugs. Of course, he'd taken the share of drugs, he had, but he had gained a huge amount of weight. When you see him in the last waltz, he's so skinny, but he gained so much weight, and he had high blood pressure where he had to take blood pressure pills, and he had to have patches all over his arms, these blood pressure patches, and going on that last tour really killed him, because the guy that he went with him pushed him too damn hard, but it was December 10th, 1999. A wonderful person, as is Levon's a very close friend of mine too, and Garth. So, I see them, about 10 times a year. And Levon only lives about 2 miles from me, and I go to his rambles. I've sang there, of course, and it's Woodstock is a nice town. It's not as crazy as it was in the late '60s. I didn't live here then, but it's it's a nice town. It's filled with writers and poets and dancers and artists and all kinds of other people, and alternative medicines and a lot of tourists come on weekends, but nobody that in town that ever goes into town on a weekend. All the musicians wait until the tourists leave. And tourists all still want to know where the festival was, and of course it was like 50 miles away from here. It originally was going to be here because at that time Janis Joplin was living here, and Joe Cocker was living here, and Hendrix had a place here, and but it's a little town of only about 8,000 people in the summer and 6,000 people in the winter, and the town fathers, the town board suddenly realized that 100,000 people were going to come to a town that had 8,000 people in the summer, and so they canceled the permit, and Mike Lang had to find a space that wasn't that far away, and he found the Asgers Farm.
Tom, it's been fantastic speaking to you today. Just before I let you go, upcoming plans? Anything on the horizon we can look forward to?
Oh God, I'm going to be doing shows. I have a whole bunch of shows coming up, and I do private shows too, and I also go to the veterans hospitals, and I sing for the soldiers that have been injured, have lost limbs and all that. I do a show every month at various veterans hospital, and I teach them. They have guitars and instruments there, but nobody there to teach them, so I teach them. And I'm going to be doing, well, as long as the good Lord keeps me alive, I'm going to keep writing, and I'm going to keep playing, and you can probably, I don't use a computer. My friend Fred, who's been my road manager since 1975, I met him in Greenwich Village. I call him up and I say, can you send this email to John Broughton or to this person? And I dictate it over the phone. So because I find a lot of songwriters that have gotten into computers, and it's so addicting. Either playing video games or going from site, from blog to blog to information. There's so much information that they stop writing songs.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They actually stop writing songs. It's so addictive. So I kind of keep that out of my life. I have a website, and I've got all that is set up by a woman in New York City named Nancy Steifen, I get a lot of emails from people, and I'll dictate stuff over the phone and answer as many, as I possibly can without spending hours and hours doing it. But, can you tell me about your station? You're in Melbourne.
That's correct, yeah, we're in Melbourne. And my show's been running for about 20-odd years now.
That's great. That's good. You had your show for 20 years, you said?
Yeah, 20 years.
That's great. Great. God, way back, I did an RCA album, I did two of them, in the mid-'70s. And there was a guy from Australia that had a semi-hit. And this would have been, oh my God, in the late 70s, maybe. I can't remember his name. It was like Cowboy Bob something. It was a song called The Beer Song, about a space virus that comes down and destroys all the beer in the world. and it's a funny song, it was a semi-hit in Australia about I guess, again, late 70s or something. But I've never been to Australia. I've been to so many places, but I haven't been there. But I've heard that folk and country and roots music is very popular there.
Very, very strong, yeah, absolutely. And we have a very strong festival season in the first quarter of the year, and plenty of festivals play around the country, and you do very well here. Oh,
yeah, I'd have to find an agent or something and sort it all out. I'd like to, I know all your major cities are all around the coastal areas, but there's places I'd love to see, like every tourist, I guess. I'd love to go to Ayers Rock.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see that and write a song there, Honestly, but Australia has a great history, especially after having lived in Ireland, and I heard all the stories of the Irish criminals that were sent down there and colonized the place.
Well, what I'll do, Tom, I'll email some information to Fred, if you like, about some festivals and agents that are down here, and see if we can get something happening.
Good. Yeah, at least once before I die, I'd like to see the country. Of course, I could live to be 95. My grandmother, who was a musician also, she lived to be 104 years old and was clear as a bell, still playing an instrument, still gardening. And one day, I was with her, and she was planting, 104, mind you, and I'm telling you, she was as clear as a bell, not disabled in any way. And she said, Tom, it's a beautiful spring day in early June, and she says, I'm tired. It's such a beautiful day. I think I'm going to take a little nap on the grass. And I said, okay, Grandma. And she lay down on the grass, and in 10 minutes, she was gone.
Wow.
No pain, nothing. She had a smile on her face. She was sleeping. I could still see the sun shining on her face and the grass and flowers. And boy, that's the way to die, isn't it?
Yep. Couldn't wish for a better way.
And to live that long and live so clearly, and she had her health. It was unbelievable. I will never forget that.
Well, Tom, thank you for your time again today. It's been fantastic catching up with you. Thanks for all those wonderful songs over the years. And if you're still turning out 40 or 50 songs every year, we've got a lot to look forward to.
All the time, I'm working on two future albums now, maybe in a year, and I've got to choose which one I'm going to do. One of them is going to be an album of love songs, but not those sappy kind of albums, but it's going to be love in all its beauty and horror and everything. And I mean, it's going to go through it all. And the last song is about people our age or that could be single in their 50s and 60s, and it's called "I Just Want to Fall in Love One More Time Before I Die." But it'll be all the shades of love from falling in love to the fights to the all kinds of stuff. And the second album is an album of all story songs. Everything is a real narrative, all subjects, but it'll be like an album of songs that are all, each one could be a short story, and so that's up ahead too. So I'm always I like to look forward. I don't like looking back, So.
Well, we'll look forward to those.
Thank you, and John. Thank you for having me on your show, and I hope someday to see that magical country of yours.
We'll be here waiting for you, Tom. Thanks again.
Okay.
All the best.
All right, John. All the best to you.
Okay.
Bye
cheers.
bye now.
Bye bye.
Cheers.